Good morning. My name is Phil Smith. I'm the National Field Director for the Concord Coalition, and I'm here today to tell you congratulations for making it to the final round of the Fiscal Challenge. At this point, could you please confirm for us your team number?
We are team 455.
455. Judges, this is team 455. By now, you're probably very familiar with the rules. I won't go over every single one of them, other than to remind you, you're going to have two 15-minute segments. The first segment will be your presentation. I will be very curt and interrupt you when your time is up. I'll be giving you time cards throughout that. Then for the 15-minute Q&A, you will be allowed to finish your thought if the time has expired at that point. So at this point, if you're ready, I'll go ahead and start the timer.
Quick question, if
Yes.
it's okay. May I set the timer on my phone?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Okay, begin when you're ready.
Hello and welcome to Upgrading the Economy, Team 455's path to a healthy and balanced budget.
Following a peak after World War II, the federal debt held by the public as a percentage of GDP decreased over time due to rising revenues and economic growth. However, this changed in the 1980s when the Reagan administration implemented tax cuts which decreased their revenues. In 2001, the Bush administration further decreased revenues through tax cuts. In 2008 and in 2020, we see revenue uptick due to the government bailouts from the financial crisis as well as the COVID-19 Paycheck Protection Program payments. Overall, we see that the government debt is expected to increase in the future, and the CBO projects that this will reach 166% in 2054. On the right, we can see over the past 50 years, the federal revenues versus outlays has seen a wide gap. This gap has increased over time, and the CBO projects that this is only expected to increase, where outlays are going to increase over time. Meanwhile, revenues will remain stagnant. On the right, we can see the increase in outlays through federal mandatory spending and discretionary spending. For example, in mandatory spending, defense, Social Security, and healthcare are all expected to increase. Meanwhile, net interest payments will also take up a larger share as well. Overall, this will decrease discretionary spending as a proportion of GDP.
So we have seen historic tax cuts in the Reagan, Bush, and Trump eras, as well as emergency payments from the Great Recession and the COVID-19 pandemic, which have significantly stunted our revenues while growing outlays. This can be solved through tax reforms. As a country, we have a history of reliance upon unsustainable social welfare programs such as Social Security and Medicare, whose funding through trust funds is reaching insolvency due to an aging population and rising healthcare costs, which can be resolved through structural reform. We also see a concentration of wealth and power amongst the elite, which has led to rising inequality and economic immobility, which can be resolved through investments in human capital. So balancing the budget for the sake of balancing the budget is an empty exercise. So take note of how we develop our policy programs to interact cohesively to create an economy that is self-sustainable, structurally stable, modern and adaptable, empowering and equitable, while still valuing political feasibility. We break our policies into three categories: tax reforms, structural reforms, and investments into human capital. We acknowledge that this proposal is very ambitious. However, we all understand the consequences of inaction. We reduce the projected debt to GDP ratio to 91% by 2054.
We will start by talking about tax reform. Tax revenue is one of the key issues for balancing the budget. In order to achieve this, we revised the income tax structure. According to a 2021 White House study, the 400 richest Americans pay 5% lower taxes than average Americans. We seek to both increase revenues and address this incongruence by adjusting itemized deductions. As you can see through this graph, which is formulated from CBO data, more than 75% of deductions are utilized by those making over $100,000. We will also be reducing the so-called charitable tax deductions, which allows for wealthy Americans to donate to organizations which they control entirely. The final issue that we will be addressing is the billionaire borrowing loophole, which allows for the ultra-wealthy to take on debt against their capital holdings, which allows them to entirely circumvent any income tax or capital gains tax. In order to address this, we will be taxing those gains as income. As many experts have pointed out, the catastrophic consequences of climate change will affect us all if they are not addressed. In order to address this, we will recommend the $26 per metric ton of emissions, which we also recommend increase 5% annually. We will then use the revenue from this tax to reinvest into the sectors which are affected, which in total we will gain about $6 trillion, and despite the, while there will be a moderate productivity loss equal to about 40% of the revenue, the reduction in emissions, which is equal to 33 billion metric tons, in addition to our investments, will completely offset any economic impacts.
Our next policy area is structural reform. We start with green energy investment, reinvesting 78% of our carbon tax revenues into extending and expanding several major clean energy tax credits. For the energy, industrial, and commercial sectors, we expand the production, investment, and advanced energy project tax credits. For the residential sector, we expand the energy-efficient home improvement, residential energy, and clean vehicle tax credits. Because we reallocate revenues proportional to the sectors that contribute them, the sectors that are hit the hardest by the carbon tax also reap the most in benefits. Furthermore, notice how the apprenticeship requirements of the production tax credit and the investment tax credit reconnects with our future policy on apprenticeships in our investments in human capital section. While this policy does not directly support individuals most harmed by climate change, for example, people living in coastal communities, we would argue that mitigating the harmful effects of climate change and reducing emissions as quickly as possible is the best way to ultimately help those people. Our next policy is transit investment, where we acknowledge that the Highway Trust Fund is set to become insolvent by 2027. We address this issue by providing a $25 billion annual transfer from our carbon tax revenues into the Highway Trust Fund. In addition, despite 80% of the American population living in urban areas, 45% of Americans lack access to safe and reliable transportation. We address this issue by investing the rest of our carbon tax revenues, $630 billion, into public transit infrastructure over 30 years. Not only through this policy package do we restore the Highway Trust Fund to a surplus, but we also see economic gains from employment, increased worker reliability, and the attraction of new business activity. Medicare spending is growing unsustainable, as we all know. The Hospital Insurance Trust Fund is set to become insolvent by as soon as 2030, as projected by the CBO. We address this using an expenditures and a revenues approach. On the expenditures side, we reduce Medicare Advantage benchmarks by 10%, mitigating disproportionate incentives for Medicare Advantage enrollment. And we also modernize cost-sharing obligations by setting an $850 deductible for Part A and Part B services with a 20% uniform coinsurance and an $8,500 annual out-of-pocket cap. While the deductibles may increase for Part B services, they would actually increase for Part A services. And while coinsurance would increase costs for Part A services, out-of-pocket caps would balance this out. On the revenue side, we include S-Corporation active participants in the net investment income tax, and we subject the 50th percentile of employer-based health insurance premiums to the income tax.
We propose a defense policy that shifts the U.S. military strategy towards hybrid warfare. Specifically, we hope to secure the U.S. global presence in the global commons through improved intelligence operations, as well as investments in naval and support force capacity. We would receive cost reductions through reducing active duty military personnel by 19% relative to the current forces, through natural attrition and lower recruiting targets. Overall, the gains that we receive are that we adapt to current shifting military conventions and that we address the military's ongoing recruitment shortages across most branches. The trade-off with this policy is that reductions in active duty military personnel may lead to short-term economic output loss. IRA funding is set to expire in 2031. we propose a policy that extends IRA funding for the IRS by allocating an additional $168 billion in total over 20 years. In addition, we rescind Guideline 14 for the CBO to allow the CBO to include IRS increases in tax revenue into their projections. Overall, this additional funding helps the IRS close the $625 billion tax gap. In addition, it allows the IRS to pursue its strategic operating goals through increasing tax enforcement, upgrading IT services, and modernizing existing tax collection processes. The only trade-off is that this could be seen as politically controversial. Lastly, the Social Security Old Age and Survivors Trust Fund is set to become insolvent in 2032. We seek to address this problem through 4 policy actions. First, we subject 90% of wages to payroll tax. Then, we index COLAs to change CPI and means test them for top earners. Third, we raise benefits age to 69 and index to longevity. Last, we means test benefits for high earners. This ensures that Social Security Trust Fund will remain solvent by 2042, also creating a surplus. In addition, by allowing the Social Security Trust Fund to remain positive, we increase the amount that Social Security buys in treasury bonds and securities, which decreases the supply for the public and thus increases prices while lowering yields. Overall, this would decrease the amount of interest that the government has to pay.
So lastly, we're going to talk about our investments into human capital. So the Affordable Connectivity Program is set to expire at the end of this month in April 2024. So by extending $3.2 billion in annual funding, we're able to provide monthly subsidies of up to $30 to communities that do not currently have access to internet. This policy also includes a one-time stipend for device purchases. Additionally, we're going to invest $180 billion over 30 years to install and expand rural internet access. This bridges the equity gap, increasing affordability and accessibility, which provides great access to telemedicine, employment opportunities, education opportunities, which reduces unemployment and reduces healthcare costs. This subsidy might, however, not be enough to cover monthly bills of internet, and individuals without a computer won't be able to benefit. However, the one-time stipend does tackle this problem. Currently, we have 4.7 million individuals in a green card backlog. So by allocating $4 billion to USCIS, we are going to increase the total annual green card limit to 1.2 million and clear the current backlog. This increases the supply of working age labor in the United States, which is extremely important due to our aging population and our declining birth rates. New backlogs, however, will still build up, and there's arguments that immigration will decrease wages for skilled workers. However, there's substantial research to show that there are long-run positive impacts on immigration to all workers. We have a labor shortage of unskilled tradesmen, and we have a housing shortage of 7 million. So by expanding the National Apprenticeship Act of 2023, we're going to invest $7.8 billion over 30 years to create 36 million new apprenticeship programs over 30 years. This provides paid skill trainings, secured employment, and substantial increase in wages and lifetime earnings for workers. We see substantial returns to businesses and investments, as well as GDP boosts of $537 billion to the GDP. This program disproportionately benefits sectors that do not require a college education and may reduce post-secondary enrollment. However, this may tackle degree inflation in our country, as well as providing economic mobility to the lowest income of workers. Our last policy is going to develop early college high school programs, which allow students in mid to high poverty to graduate with an associate's degree upon completion. This reallocates low-impact Title I funds to a high-impact program that allows these students to improve their career prospects and earning potentials. These programs are expensive to maintain, and less students may benefit overall. However, it's a greater impact per student.
Because our policies not only increase GDP, but also raise revenues above outlays, we are able to reduce the principal debt of the United States government. This reduction in the principal allows us to decrease interest costs, which will further help us address the debt-to-GDP ratio. Our policy package includes benefits for those on all sides of the aisle. For example, we are able to both increase taxes for the wealthy while also helping blue-collar workers. We are able to address issues facing senior citizens with security, social security and solvency, and also invest in opportunities for the younger generations. The CBO projects that by quarter 2 of 2054, the United States debt-to-GDP ratio will reach 166%. Through a combination of our policies, we're able to bring that down 75 percentage points to a final debt-to-GDP ratio of 91%.
With our tax reform and structural reform policies comprising over 50% of the reduction in the debt-to-GDP ratio and our human capital investments comprising 46.5% of the reduction in the debt-to-GDP ratio, notice how our policies come together to create an economy that is self-sustainable, structurally stable, modern and adaptable, and empowering and equitable for all. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Team 455. Your time has expired, and we now transition to our Q&A with the judges. So, judges, which of you would like to go first?
I'll go first because we're on this slide. Can you just explain to me why the human capital component is 46.5%? I was trying to take notes as we were going through it. So I understand the tax stuff and the structural, but the human capital seems like a lot of it was outlaid that was being funded by the taxes. So how does that go into the reduction of debt to GDP? I just need that clarity.
Yeah, of course. So because, first of all, we're not technically increasing the deficit because we're reallocating revenues, so that provides a mitigating effect. Plus we get the GDP gains from all of these policies. Our biggest gains are from the ECHS, from the broadband policy, as well as the green energy, green energy is structural reform, but ECHS and our broadband policies are our two biggest GDP boosters.
Thank you. Can you go to your Social Security
Of course.
slide? I think you guys had to fit a lot in, so I was trying to take it all.
Appreciate it, yeah, thank you.
So, I guess two questions. One, why did you pick age 79? I get indexing to longevity, I think is a really good point. Why 69 as opposed to 70 or, you know?
So, kind of the reason we decided on 69 is that due to just rise in just age, we thought that just by increasing it to 69 is good. Recently, there has been a drop in life expectancy for the average, specifically for men. And so currently that's around 73. And so this does provide time, though also when someone does hit 69, due to just in general rising longevity, kind of that subset of people is kind of generally expected that they'll live longer. So that's important to know.
If I might also add, we also chose this because it helped us to restore the trust fund. So without restoring the trust fund, we would see significant cuts in benefits. And also with the immigration policy that 71% of immigrants are in working age population, this will likely shift the demographics of our population to a lower age. So if that would be, when that would be the case, then we would be able to potentially lower this age, but this was the policy that we set up together specifically for Social Security to ensure that we're able to provide benefits to everybody and restore the trust fund.
And then the last question is not sort of my colleagues. When you're thinking about means testing benefits for high earners, how would you think about designing that? Is that something where you're looking at trying to cap the benefit level that's going out monthly, or is it looking at like every year when they file a 1040 trying to recapture something?
I think through our means testing, we did specifically as a cap, and that would be for the top 1%. That's...
Okay, you're capping a benefit. Okay.
I hope, did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I had a question and it just escaped me. Oh, it was about immigration. How did you, there are a lot of different approaches to looking at immigration policy, and you seem to focus just on green cards. Did you consider other changes to immigration, and how did you come about focusing just on the green cards?
So we found that we were looking at a couple different reports, and particularly one from the Brookings Institution was looking at restoring the demographics in the aging population and from the decline in birth rates as well. And it said that 1.5 million is raising the annual green card limit to 1.5 million is the, out of the other four options that they had, was the only one that would increase the working age and the youth population, the the young age population in comparison to the old age. So we also used a BPC report, which talked about the benefits of clearing the current backlog. So we use those numbers in formulating our projections of clearing the current backlog and then projecting that forward with a increase of 500,000 on top of the current 675,000, which gets us to that 1.2 million total annual green cards.
And, oh, sorry, I was just going to add, the reason we focus on green cards specifically is also a legislative feasibility component, because green cards are capped because of these somewhat arbitrary quotas. And also we see that many libertarian think tanks and many right-leaning members of Congress and such are more willing to compromise on in terms of green cards because you get gains, more gains from employment than you might from other sources. That's why we focus on green cards specifically.
And did you consider, I know we're looking at, is the 4 billion over the full period of time?
That's a good question.
Right,
Yeah.
because, it can be very difficult to hire sufficient staff, train them. What sort of phase-in did you consider?
So the $4 billion is for the first 8 years to clear the current backlog. I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
And you thought that was a feasible time period for clearing?
Yes, that is what was detailed in the Bipartisan Policy Center report.
How did you all think about the potential interaction between your Social Security changes and that fiscal impact and the changes here with immigration and immigration's potential impact on Social Security?
So as my colleague mentioned before, our immigration policy is designed to address this issue of rising, of an aging population where we're getting less and less income from Social Security because we have this aging population that requires a lot more benefits. And so the connection there is that we have flexibility in our policy such that if this immigration policy leads to an increase, like a sufficient increase in payroll taxes, then we might not have to make all of the changes to Social Security that we set out, because we would end up restoring the trust fund much sooner than we expect. However, it's difficult to incorporate this in the model because you don't know exactly how much you're going to get in payroll tax revenue from this immigration policy, which is why we take the safe approach. We say, okay, all else equal, this is what we need to restore the trust fund. Given uncertainty, given like these different circumstances, maybe we won't have to raise the full benefits age to 69. So that's how those two policies interact, if that answers your question.
So, for example, so to be specific here, in this green card section, there is your expenditures and GDP impact that is exclusive of any impact on Social Security or revenue.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Correct.